The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. On today's episode, we are joined by Fadi El Dawood and James Dick from Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Dr. Fadi El Dawood is a greenhouse vegetable specialist at Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. His portfolio includes vegetables and cannabis grown in controlled environments, such as greenhouses, warehouses, and vertical farms. After earning his doctorate from the Department of Biology at McMaster University with a specialization in molecular plant pathology, Fadi worked at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and in the Department of Plant Agriculture at the University of Guelph in Ontario. He has conducted applied and fundamental research of horticulture and field crops and has experience communicating his research to the scientific community and producers. Today, he works in collaboration with producers, researchers, and industry partners to advance controlled environment agriculture in Ontario. James Dick is a professional engineer working as the engineering specialist for crop systems and environment with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, based in Vinland, Ontario. James was raised on a field crop and hog farm in the Niagara region and completed his mechanical engineering degree at the University of Waterloo. His work at OMAFRA focuses on best practices, innovations, and environmental impacts of grain drying and storage, field equipment, precision agriculture, and greenhouse gas reduction. He has a particular interest in energy use and efficiency of farm production processes. Now let's get into the episode with Fadi and James. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you, Lysandra. And our good colleague, John Pooley, is off this week in New York, so we're on together, and I'm looking forward to this episode as well.
So am I. So today we're welcoming Fadi and James from OMAFRA. Welcome, Fadi and James.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Lysandra.
To start off this episode, can you tell our listeners what OMAFRA is and what your roles are at the organization?
Sure. So OMAFRA is the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So the ministry's mandate is to work with the agriculture sector as well as with rural communities to help with any issues that arise. The ministry has a number of different branches, and I'm part of the agricultural development branch, which includes a number of crop and livestock specialists. So in the province, we have a specialist for different production systems, different crops that producers can tap into for technical advice. So I'm the greenhouse vegetable specialist with the ministry, which means I work with greenhouse producers, but also other forms of controlled environment agriculture like vertical farms. I'm based out of the Hera Research and Development Center, which is a federal Agriculture Agri-Food Canada research station. So I work very closely with my colleagues, researchers, AFC, but my main role is to work with production greenhouse producers and vertical farms to really connect them with the latest in terms of the science. And I work with researchers at other research institutions, universities, and similar research institutions across the province to advance controlled environment agriculture in Ontario.
And my name's James Dick, and I am, like Fadi, I am a technical specialist, but in a slightly different role. So I'm actually a professional engineer, and at the ministry here, I am one of our engineering specialists. My role is as the engineering specialist for crop systems and environment. And so what that means really is looking at the post-harvest side of crops, and I tend to work more maybe with the grain crops than I do with the horticulture crops, but a lot of it is related to energy use, particularly in storage. That's kind of my background. Before I joined the ministry, I did a lot of work in heating, ventilation, air conditioning, design, and energy modeling, and so I've kind of brought that expertise here and gotten involved in a bit more of the energy side and understanding energy use and how we can use energy more efficiently. And so I work closely with Fadi and some of the other greenhouse specialists. I'm within the environmental management branch of OMAFRA, so a slightly different branch. We tend to focus a little bit more on the environmental impacts and implications of various agricultural practices, but definitely from a technical perspective, and work closely with many different producers to ensure that they're using energy properly and that they're, doing the best things they can in their facilities.
So, gentlemen, welcome to you both. And after your introductions, actually, I think our listeners are going to capture a lot of interesting facts and understanding of the greenhouse industry. I think many people aren't aware of the sophistication and the challenges and some of the leading edge things that greenhouses are doing, and based on your introductions, we're going to be able to touch upon that, discuss that and really inform our listeners. So thank you for joining us. Here's the next question. Have you noticed any change in the Ontario greenhouse operation as a result of rising operating cost and increasing carbon tax?
I know energy is one of the biggest costs for greenhouse producers. So it has always been a major issue that producers will look at to make sure that they're using energy, natural gas, electricity in the best way they can. As you can imagine, greenhouse production in Canada in our cold winters, with the rise of year-round production, with the increase in lighting, there's a lot of expense for electricity and natural gas. So a number of things that producers are doing to make their production systems more efficient include such things as installing more light emitting diodes or LEDs instead of the less efficient high pressure sodium lights, for example. There's also a lot of interest in better and more effective energy curtains and light emitting curtains that are able to reduce the use of natural gas to really keep that heat within the greenhouse production system. So those are just some examples that the greenhouse sector is looking at to really help improve their efficiency. Of course, automation is another one, is just to make the production system more efficient, to really produce the maximum yield that you can for every bit of energy that is consumed in these production systems.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that certainly even overall there's more awareness now of energy use as prices rise. So people are, I think, watching their energy bills more closely maybe than they used to. And certainly for greenhouses, as Fady mentioned, because it's a controlled environment, it is a significant amount of energy use compared to outdoor crops where you rely on the weather to provide your water and your sunshine. And, in a greenhouse, you have much more ability to control that. So there's a lot more sophisticated control systems out there too that allow you to refine every component of what you want to achieve within that greenhouse environment. And so there's lots of different strategies I think that growers are looking at, and all with an eye kind of to improving their energy bill or reducing their energy bill, I guess. But certainly it's a big concern because we do see prices rising, and obviously that ultimately ends up with our food being more expensive at the end of the day when we go to buy it in the grocery store.
So a follow-up question, and completely understand the energy cost of, doubled, some places tripled. So that's certainly got on the radar screen. Is there carbon management? Is that starting to be a topic or concern to the greenhouse growers as yet, based on your perspective?
Yeah, the carbon footprint for agriculture as a whole is an important issue, and greenhouses are one of the bigger production systems that have a fairly large carbon footprint, with the natural gas that's being used for heating, the electricity for lighting, as well as other operations. So it's always been a topic that the producers are looking at to reduce their footprint. The sector is very well in a lot of conversations about really closing the loop on some of these production systems in order to get closer to net zero type of framework. So those conversations happening. A lot of producers are looking for ways to use energy more efficiently and reduce any kind of waste that production systems are emitting.
And here is a place where, OMAFRA is looking to take a bit of a role. So one of the things that I've been working on with some colleagues, and certainly have roped Fady into it as well as some others, is we've actually been building a carbon calculator for Ontario farms, not only greenhouses, but greenhouses are included, and looking at the major sources of greenhouse gas emissions from crop farming, from livestock, and from controlled environment farming. So for crops, it's obviously fertilizer is a big concern, and there's been some headlines in the news media around fertilizer emissions. The federal government has set a target, and so our tool, in essence, will help farmers understand kind of the emissions coming from their own operations and where there might be opportunities to save. And so when it comes to greenhouse, we've got kind of a high level energy model that will estimate the heating energy and the lighting energy for a greenhouse, and will provide some recommendations of what a grower might be able to do to reduce those carbon emissions and that energy use. So it's still under development. The first part is available now publicly, which is the crops and the livestock. And you can find that at ontario.ca/agrisuite, AGRISUITE. And then the greenhouse portion will be released towards the end of this. But that's one example of some of the things that we're doing to try and help educate Ontario farmers and how they can do a better job and improve their environmental footprint and manage their carbon emissions.
In addition to that, I'm not sure if you're exploring anything else, but can you discuss what technologies OMAFRA is exploring to help reduce, control energy and carbon in the transition?
Yeah, absolutely. First thing that we're doing is a lot more research. So we have a number of projects looking at the effect of different current technologies on the energy balance in the greenhouse through modeling, through measuring a lot of in production greenhouse type of research. But we also have other research projects looking at different ways of building greenhouse. There are a number of technologies on the market right now in which you can reduce the energy consumption of a greenhouse just by the way that you design it. Using heat capture and heat storage technologies, all those sorts of things are being looked at through these research projects that are co-funded by OMAFRA. But we also, besides the research, the crop specialists also do a lot of training and education and what we call a knowledge transfer and translation, or KTT activities, with webinars and courses and workshops. So throughout those training and education programs that we are introducing or at least discussing new technologies that the sector can use that are commercially available now, such as hybrid boiler systems that can run on either electricity or natural gas, depending on the time of day, depending on the price of energy. We also have collaborations with the Harrow Research and Development Center, like I mentioned earlier, where sea scientists are looking at different light recipes. So as you can imagine, lighting is a big portion of the energy bill, especially for winter production in Ontario. And if we can shift that lighting from on-peak demand hours to off-peak, and for example, in the evenings with longer lighting recipes at a reduced intensity, those sorts of strategies are really helping producers have a number of different choices in the way that they grow their crops. And we're also looking at some things such as solar thermal technologies, where you're utilizing the power of the sun not only to grow your crop, but to potentially heat water and store that heat in order to heat the greenhouse with less reliance on fossil fuels. So we're always trying to introduce these technologies and research these technologies in our activities. And of course, OMAFRA also has a number of funding programs that we had. For example, the Greenhouse Competitiveness and Innovation Initiative, or GCII, had a number of different phases in order to promote the use of different technologies for heating and energy, as well as automation for greenhouses. So there's really a mix of research, training and education, and funding programs that we try to provide in OMAFRA to really help the sector explore and research all the alternatives that are available right now.
Just to add to that, if a greenhouse is listening right now and they want to get involved with OMAFRA, how would they do that?
Yeah, they can contact myself. I can direct them in the right way. We do have a blog. It's the ongreenhousevegetables.ca. So on greenhousevegetables, all one word, .ca, where you can get a lot of information on our training and education, as well as we'll post on any kind of announcements for funding, or you can go on the OMAFRA website. It's a very good website, or you can contact the central information center that we have. So there's a number of ways to get hold of myself or other folks within OMAFRA.
There's also a floriculture focused blog as well from our greenhouse floriculture specialist. So if there's any flower growers rather than vegetable growers, I think that one is on floriculture, so onfloriculture.ca, I believe.
That's right.
But one of the best ways, if you're not sure where to go and you're looking for information, one of the best ways to get into the ministry is to call our contact center. So we have a team of dedicated people in Guelph that are available during business hours that can answer just a myriad of questions. And if you're not sure who to contact, they're a great first stop to whether it's questions about programming or questions about technical information or anything like that. So they can be reached by calling 1-877-424-1300. And as I mentioned, they're very knowledgeable and they'll definitely connect you to the right people It might be either Fatty or myself, depending if you've got a technical question or something like that, but they can help you get to the right place very, very quickly.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so my next question, from your experience and research, what top 3 things need to be done or considered by the greenhouse industry to control and reduce energy carbon emissions for the greenhouse sector?
So maybe I'll take a crack at that one, David. I think there's a few things that come top of mind for me, and maybe they sound simple, but I think that we shouldn't discount their importance. So number one would be making sure that your facility is properly maintained. You have to make sure that like you don't have massive holes in your greenhouse, that your joints are reasonably well sealed, that when you have your vents closed, that they're actually closed and that they're not leaking, that your heating systems are maintained and that are able to operate at their peak efficiency. It sounds simple and it sounds boring, but if you haven't given your systems the opportunity to do their best, you're already starting with a handicap. So make sure that that's number one on my list, is make sure that your systems and your facilities are maintained well and able to operate efficiently. Number two is maximize the benefit of the control system that you have in place. However complex it may be or simple it may be, there's opportunities there to make sure that you've got appropriate sensors in appropriate rooms, that you're controlling to the temperatures that you want to be controlling to, that you don't have big gaps in your system where maybe a room is so much colder than you expected. So make sure your control system is operating properly and controlling the different areas of your greenhouse the way that you expect. Otherwise, if it's not, then you're probably wasting energy. And then finally, when you're looking at maybe improvements that you might be able to make in your facility, we've talked about some of the technologies already that we are doing some research into, or things that might be available for growers today. Don't discount the importance of doing some kind of an energy audit or an energy study before you jump straight to buying a new piece of equipment or a new upgrade. So you can hire a consultant to come in and take a look at your actual facility. They can go over your energy bills with you. They can do some monitoring in various parts of your greenhouse and figure out where the biggest sources of energy use are. Because without that, you might be trying to tackle a problem that isn't actually your biggest problem. You might be spending money on an upgrade that's not going to be as beneficial as you're hoping, because maybe there's a bigger problem somewhere else. So certainly take advantage of any opportunities to do energy audits. Sometimes there is some funding for this too available, either through your utility company, or sometimes there are government programs that will help that as well. So it's critically important, because that helps you target your capital funding to the best improvements and making sure that what you're chasing is going to be the right solution for you. There's modeling programs out there as well that you can use. As I mentioned, our AgriSuite tool that we're developing is one that's at a very high level. There's some others, one called RET-Screen that was developed by the federal government that looks a little bit at greenhouses as well as other things. There's some other more dedicated for greenhouse ones. Some of them, there is a cost to some of the software tools, so they're not all free, but that's another way that you can take a look at your facility and try and identify where those key opportunities might be. So yeah, that would be my top three.
I think I just want to stress the maintenance piece is a big piece.
I say, as an independent party that has worked in the field that you're discussing, I think you nailed it. So from our experience, typically, depending on your baseline, there's up to 25% of reduction of cost and usage. And James, you are right. Like 50% of that 25% reduction has to do with the properly operating the equipment and having an understanding how to operate and maintain that equipment. That's from our experience, and it is not terribly exciting for people, but when you do it and you do it with dedication, it's measurable. So I think you guys well stated, and I hope people listen and follow through what you guys are saying, because I think that provides measurable benefits for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think especially in this industry, there's so many tools and equipment out there that promote energy saving and things like that, that I think oftentimes a lot of greenhouses are quick to purchase something rather than review internally and see what they can save based on operation. So many great points there.
And just to add one more thing, I mean, if you haven't done that energy audit study, it's hard to know when you do make a change, whether or not you've actually made an improvement. If you haven't taken the time to measure your baseline, I mean, I guess a greenhouse operator has the advantage of seeing their energy bill monthly, so you might see that change. But without a true understanding of your baseline, it's going to be hard to know whether or not that money you spent on whatever your upgrade, whether that actually made the difference that you were expecting it to.
And I'd say definitely talk to your utility company. So your electricity provider, your natural gas provider, they have some really good information in terms of some tips and stuff that you need to keep in mind when looking at the energy balance of the greenhouse, the energy consumption. And for those audits that James mentioned, there are sometimes programs that will help you, bringing in a professional to go over your energy bills and looking at the establishment and trying to identify some of the weak points.
I wanted to add one more thing. So typically people will look at physical audits, what you're referring to, but actually there's also the management process of what customers do and don't do with whether it's a control system or their utility bills or equipment. And so I was so pleased, Fadi, that you had mentioned that you have courses, because effectively you're trying to educate people on what they can do internally in their management process, which I think is just as important as looking at the physical equipment as well. So I'd like to stress that to the listeners.
On that note, OMAFRA has produced a successful Grow On webinar series and training courses, which we at 360 Energy are a fan of, as you can tell. Has the increased awareness on carbon reduction had an influence on future webinar topics and training for the greenhouse industry?
Yeah, so the Grow On webinar series is a regular webinar series that we put on in the greenhouse team in OMAFRA. So I'm not the only greenhouse specialist in the ministry. There's a whole team that work with greenhouse producers, whether you're floriculture or food crops. So we started the Grow On webinar series in 2021, mainly a little bit in 2020, but really started taking off in 2021, where each webinar would have a different topic, whether it's production, like lighting, nutrition, heat stress, those sorts of things, physiological disorders, where we could bring in experts and researchers to talk about those topics, including water quality and water management as well. But we also have integrated pest management specialists that work with greenhouse sector in OMAFRA, so we have those sorts of topics on disease and pests as well. And part of the webinar series that we've had in the past, we've included topics. We had one webinar that was dedicated to looking at alternative ways of heating your greenhouse. So that's when we brought in some of the experts, some of the industry suppliers that were working with, the hybrid boilers that I mentioned, where you can switch between natural gas and electricity heating. We've also explored solar thermal technologies, and of course 360 Energy has been part of those webinars, providing that expert opinion on some of these technologies. So yes, the interest for more of those sorts of webinars is definitely out there. We've heard some really great feedback on those specific topics, and we're definitely planning on not only continuing the series, but including webinars that specifically look at energy in the greenhouse, whether it's alternative ways of heating the greenhouse, as I mentioned before, or alternative ways of providing energy to your greenhouse. The cogeneration systems, for example, that are being used more and more in the greenhouse sector, where you're using natural gas to produce not only heat for the greenhouse, but also electricity, and potentially selling some of the surplus electricity to the grid. So there's a lot of different technologies out there that can help the greenhouse sector really diversify its energy source, because I think that's the key. There isn't going to be one silver bullet, the energy question, but it's really going to be in diversifying the energy source that's going to play a key role in stabilizing the energy sources for greenhouse production.
This is a follow-up point because, OMAFRA is based in the Ontario, but from my understanding, Fadi and James, that you're getting interest from across the country, if not around the world, because of the work that you're doing. Is that correct? You're getting that type of interest in this subject matter?
Yeah, we notice a lot of the participants that tune into our webinars, that sign up for the workshops, that attend, the conferences that we hold, like the Canadian Greenhouse Conference that we organize every year. It just happened last week at the beginning of October in Niagara Falls, and it happens every year at the beginning of October. It's CanadianGreenhouseConference.ca, I believe you can get more information. So those sorts of events, whether they be in person or online, are definitely getting interest from not only Ontario, but from across the country. Ontario is home to Canada's biggest greenhouse sector, but there's a growing greenhouse sector, obviously in BC and British Columbia. In Quebec, there's a lot of interest in the Maritimes as well as the prairies. You see more and more greenhouses being built, and where you have greenhouses being built, there's the need for energy to run those greenhouses. So we have participants. We work from across the country, as I mentioned. We work very closely with Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers, so OGVG, which is the Ontario organization that represents cucumber, tomato, and pepper producers. They have a lot of functions in regulating the production, but also they do have a big role in research. They co-fund a lot of the research projects that I mentioned earlier. So they get a lot of that information. A lot of their members obviously are involved in our research projects, but we try to really disseminate the information not only to Ontario and OGVG, but there's the BC Greenhouse Grower Association. So they'll get our information as well and share amongst their members, as well as working with our counterparts in other provinces, other ministries in Quebec and Alberta and British Columbia. They have dedicated staff that work with the greenhouse sector in those provinces. So we work with them as well whenever we put on a workshop or these annual conferences that I mentioned, like the CGC, where we always see them there, and we work collaboratively in order to share that information.
So that actually leads into the next question, gentlemen, and that is, when you look at climate change, it really is a worldwide phenomenon. And so with OMAFRA, are you working, you had mentioned in the last comment, Fady, that you are working with some Canadian institutions, but are you working with any other institutions worldwide to help advance this case of how to, for climate change for the greenhouse industry as well?
Yeah, the Netherlands is a world leader in greenhouse production. And just from my contacts there and reading the news, we know the energy crisis that the Netherlands is experiencing and how it's really impacted the greenhouse production. There's stories where greenhouses are not even planting any crops because they don't necessarily see, a point in it or the return on investment with the high energy costs. So we're really working in collaboration with our colleagues in the Netherlands to not only share information, but learn from each other's experiences. Of course, the greenhouse sector in North America is very intermingled between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. A lot of the Ontario producers have operations south of the border, whether it's in the US and in Mexico. So the North American market is connected. So what happens in Canada will affect the US and Mexico and vice versa. We're always working with our colleagues in Europe, with our colleagues in other parts of North America. Ohio State University, for example, just opened up a controlled environment agriculture center that includes a research greenhouse. So we're, working with them on some projects. Yeah, so there's a lot of, as you mentioned, it is an international issue in terms of energy for agriculture as a whole, and making sure that our food supply chains are intact in order to facilitate food production and distribution.
And not only on the technical side with research, but I mean, we are a government ministry, so we have lots of policy and program folks that are working with counterparts in the federal government and across the country, and with counterparts in other countries as well, to understand, what may be going on there. And we're actually about to enter into a new 5-year program framework with the federal government. So the last one that may be familiar to agricultural producers was called CAP, or the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. And this next one has just been announced to be named the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. So SCAP is the new acronym. And this is a 5-year agreement between the federal government in Canada and all the provinces for, among other things, a number of programming things. Most producers would know it best that we do often have some funding available for various, whether it's upgrades to facilities or programming such like energy audits and things like that. We've funded those kinds of things in the past. So the actual programming is still under development, and it'll likely be launched early next year. But we do expect that there will be a pretty strong focus on climate change. The federal government has made that clear. So that's definitely one of their top priorities. And so we have lots of policy people and program people working with the federal government as well in development of that. So more to come on that. Neither Fatty nor I have too much insight on what that's going to look like yet, but that is coming down the pipeline.
So that's fascinating and great information for our listeners. The question I want to pose to you guys is, I know, the focus is to help growers in this work. How frequently do you interact with suppliers that are in the business trying to actually enact or put in new technology or system? Is there very much activity working with others in the marketplace as well?
Yeah, since the crop specialists on OMAFRA work with there's it comes natural to work with suppliers, right? Because producers are always mentioning certain technologies or certain suppliers that they've been approached by. They want, maybe the crop specialist to take a look at the technology to get another opinion on the technology. So yeah, we work not only with producers, with researchers, but with suppliers as well. It's a community effort, right? Because the producers are basically telling us what they need. The researchers are able to answer some of the questions, and the suppliers are the ones that have the commercial solutions, right? So we really need to work with all different parts of the system in order to solve some of these issues. For our specific activities, if you go on the ongreenhousevegetables.ca blog or website, you'll be able to access some of the recorded webinars from the past. You can scroll through them, watch them at your convenience, and you'll see that we don't only have producers and researchers on these webinars, we do have suppliers as well, right? Because some of the suppliers have excellent expertise that can really help inform the producers, the public, in terms of what the technology has to offer.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. To conclude this episode, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
From my perspective, I think it would be the conversation that we had earlier about the importance of understanding your facility and taking the time to look at all the components, all the places where you're using energy, and trying to figure out how you can do a better job with each one of those. So whether that looks like bringing in a professional to do some kind of an audit, an energy audit, or like you say, David, a management audit, I would definitely highly recommend doing that. But at a minimum, taking a look at your facility and just sitting down with yourself and those that are operating your facility and trying to understand what's working well, what's not, where there might be room for improvement. That would be my key takeaway.
Yeah, from my perspective, education and training will be a big part of making the greenhouse sector more efficient and increasing the productivity. So I think keeping yourself as well as your staff well informed of the new technology by engaging the training and education opportunities that not only OMAFRA has, but other institutions have as well. And just keeping up to date either through, reading your monthly Greenhouse Canada magazine and those sorts of things that just kind of keep you up to date with what's happening, what's available to you in the sector.
So my takeaway is the wealth of knowledge and information and expertise that both you gentlemen had discussed that's available from OMAFRA, and that ultimately reinforce, James, what you're saying. This isn't a one-time shot. You look at this. This is a continuous process. I think a lot of times people think, okay, I did my audit, I'm done, I'm finished. It's continual. You always have to monitor and measure. So I think if people use and review your website and take advantage of the resources, I think they certainly would serve them well. And I encourage people to do that. So I thank you both for sharing insight on OMAFRA and what you're doing. It almost seems to me, and I'm typically a real homer, I think Canada and especially Ontario, yes, the Netherlands leading edge for sure, but I think we're catching up with the knowledge and expertise that we're starting to gain. So thank you both, gentlemen, for being online and sharing your knowledge and what's coming forward.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, David, I think you ended it off on a good note. I think, every podcast episode that we record with the guest, we always say we're learning something new. And I was definitely pleasantly surprised by how much OMAFRA is doing for the greenhouse space. And I definitely encourage the greenhouses listening to check out all the resources both Fatty and James mentioned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net, and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.